So, Blair, we PRs consider ourselves quite creative people, but yet I have been following you for many, many years, and your content is fantastic. And you always actually take the position that we're not creative enough in the area of pricing. So I wanted to just draw that from you. If you could explain what do you mean by pricing creativity, and why do you think we as PRs, as creative people, don't take that creativity to the pricing world?
I'm not sure I know what it is about PR people that are, and I'll say it, they're the least creative of all of the types of creative businesses when it comes to pricing. This came up in a conversation yesterday. So a client has a challenge, approaches a PR firm that they're not currently working with, and they say, I need help with X. And my budget is Y. Let's say the budget's to make things simple, $120,000. The PR firm immediately takes that budget and divides it by 12. Right? Even if it's a short, the PR firm assumes a relationship, even when it's not what the client wants, like an ongoing retainer-based relationship, even when it's not what the client wants, even when it's not in the best interest of the client, even when the payments don't align with how the firm creates value, when in the relationship they create value, they do it because it suits them, because everybody would like to have this recurring revenue where our clients pay us monthly.
God, I must admit, I think I've done that in the past. Taken a budget and immediately thought, how can I divide it into sort of months? And I think it's just that legacy mindset of, having clients on retainer. And in the last, decade, that's moved and shifted to sort of project-based work. And I think PRs, we've generally resisted that project-based, because you can end up with a feast or famine scenario. And our preference is that monthly secure amount coming in. But yeah, I totally hear you, Blair.
Retainer. So what does pricing creativity look like? Because Blair, when I hear that and I have a subcontractor who says they're going to price creatively, you are you? Like I get kind of, sure you are.
Well, I'm not sure that you would express it to the client as pricing creatively. Creatively, I think you should just think more creative about your pricing. I think the first time this came up for me, I was quite a young consultant, and I had a PR firm client who, and they were telling me about an opportunity they had that they had turned down. And usually I'm getting my clients encouraging them to turn down more opportunities. But this one was, I forget what the exact numbers were, but let's say it was $60,000. The client had a problem of a short-term nature and needed a fix. They had a $60,000 budget for it. But this firm had a minimum retainer amount of $20,000 a month. So they were half of what they could afford. So they walked away from the opportunity. And I pointed out, you could have solved this problem in six to 8 weeks, right? So you could have billed more than 20 grand a month for one of you. You could have taken the $60,000, sold them a solution, and made even more money, right? But you would have walked away from a long-term relationship, which was not in their best interest. It was only in your best interest. Now, I will point out that when you go from a model where everybody is on monthly retainer and you start adding projects of this nature in, short-term projects, it does affect your staffing a little bit. It does affect how you apply resources against opportunities. But I think PR firms generally need to wake up to this idea that a certain percentage, I would suggest it might even be approaching the majority, but a significant percentage of their clients would rather hire them on a project basis and would be willing to pay them more than they pay every month.
And I think, there's the opportunity, because you mentioned something very practical, Blair, that agencies, they need to resource plan, and they, will hire permanent team members, and they pay monthly salaries. And in their mind, they would like to have a monthly income that goes to pay those monthly salaries. And actually, we can be a lot more agile because, for instance, when you have feast or famine, or you have lots of projects coming in one quarter, you can actually lean on sort of freelance support, project-based support. There's a lot of senior counsel, but that obviously sounds easier than the reality as well, because you have the onboarding and offboarding. But as you said, companies are willing to pay a premium for projects. So that premium can then go to offset the additional costs in having a more complex resourcing planning. Now, if people are listening and tuning into this episode and they're thinking, do you know what? I love PR. I love the work that I do, but I'm just not able to get that, ideal and a 20% profit margin, for instance. And you have a lot of like owner managed PR firms, for instance, who, they end up paying themselves the least amount because they can't get their head around. What are the general tips that you would give to people who want to improve the way that they price, from what kind of mindset do they need to do, what kind of practical considerations, what would be your overarching sort of points for them to start thinking about?
Well, I would take a closer look at how and where in the relationship you create the most value. Mm-hmm. And let's say, so over the course of a year, there's certain things that a PR firm would do. You could put them under the category of monitoring or ongoing support of some kind. And then there's the super valuable stuff of executive crisis communications for executives. And that stuff, you can't plan for it because you don't know when it's going to come up. But that is probably the most valuable service that a typical PR firm would provide. So, and what you're doing is you're effectively averaging out in your retainer, you're averaging out the kind of ongoing services and some sort of expectation of a crisis or the need for the senior partner to come in and do some significant work of high value. Now, if no crisis arises, the client starts to feel like they're overpaying you. Yeah. If it's all crisis, the professional starts to feel like they're undercharging or the client's taking advantage of them. And that's often the case in a retainer relationship. Somebody feels like they're getting the short end of the stick. Mm. I had a conversation with a PR firm owner the other day, and she was explaining a problem about, she does crisis communications. So she comes in, she's hired when the problem is most significant, the willingness to pay is highest. She comes in, does her magic, and then tries to turn it into a long-term engagement, which she's typically pretty successful at. But then the problem that arises for her is that when she gets dragged down into the minutia of the day-to-day business, she loses her kind of status as the problem solver, the crisis person that the CEO would reach out to. I pointed out that her firm was large enough. She had a few staff members, other counselors, where she should not get involved in the day-to-day business. And maybe even her services, there's only a certain amount of capacity that's available to the client. But when she steps in, the client should know it's expensive and high value. And it's not that they can't bundle together a long-term engagement on a monthly retainer, but she should not be involved in that. There might be some access to her, but she should not be kind of lowering herself in the eyes of the client by doing this day-to-day stuff.
So this makes the initial sale very important, because often the most senior people are put in front of the client to bring the client into the fold, and the client tends to, well, I'm going to get that senior person. That's what convinced me to go with that firm. Yet so much of what you just said was, there will be times you will, but there will be times you don't. And so how important is it for that clarity to be expressed when initiating a project or a relationship with a new client?
Yeah, it's very important. It's actually pretty easy to do. When you don't do it properly, it feels like we all use the term bait and switch, right? It feels like a bait and switch. Exactly. I met with the senior partner. I hired the senior partner. Now I'm saddled with this junior person. So in a closing conversation, or in the first meeting after a closing conversation when you've agreed to work together, but probably in the closing conversation, the senior person, let's assume that the senior partner is the closer, is the person who gets the deals done. And that's not a bad thing. And they're probably selling to somebody senior on the client side. They have the more junior person with them in the room. Now, when you move from closing the deal to onboarding the client, let's say it's even after the closing conversation, the deal is signed. I mean, in the closing conversation, you would be clear about the roles, but in what you might call the kickoff meeting after you're hired, the senior partner would be there leading that meeting. The more junior person would be in that meeting. And it's a very important, subtle, but vital clue is that the senior person never takes notes. So you will find if you have a senior person and a junior person in a meeting with the client and you're talking about what's going to get done, it is the junior person taking the notes. And you will see that the client, when they're imparting information about what's to happen on it, like logistics, et cetera, they will turn to whoever's taking the notes. So the senior person should never be seen visibly taking notes in a meeting like that where there is a junior person present. And of course, if we're doing it on Zoom, we've got our note takers anyway, so it gets a little bit trickier. But when you're meeting face-to-face, try that approach.
I would take that to mean the CTAs, if it's an AI recording, which could also be in person these days, the CTAs are expressed back by the non-senior person, the junior person, not the mid-level person. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and they're visibly taking control of the day-to-day relationship, and at some point, the senior person might just reiterate the role. So, Armando here is going to take care of this on the day-to-day basis. I'll be working with him at a high level. You have access to me at a high level, but Armando is going to make everything run on time, and he's responsible for the success of your account. When things get serious, I'm there for you, and I'm also there for Armando.
Yeah. I love that clarity. Now, there has been some conversations in the industry that the PR folk, we are very rigid in the way that we price, be it retainer and project, but also there's another layer that people have been critiquing PRs, and that is whether we should be pricing based on time, or should we be looking into pricing based on outcomes and how valuable that outcome is to a particular client. Where do you stand on that, Blair?
Well, I wrote a post recently, and I'm not the only one to have written a post like this, but that says that AI is basically the death of labor-based pricing. I can see exemptions for, even though I could see an exemption for it, I wouldn't necessarily think about it this way, but I could see exemptions for crisis communications. The senior partner who's behind the glass with the sign in case of emergency, break glass with a ridiculous hourly rate for the right types of clients. It's just, the benefit of buying and selling time is it's easy to measure, even though it's only a proxy for value. And there are certain things, so AI is making everybody productive. So if you're charging the same hourly rate, you're creating more value for your clients. Your clients are looking at the tools that you're using or the tools that you should be using to increase your productivity. They're pressuring you to change your rates, to lower your rates. So you're getting pressure from all kinds of different places. But generally speaking, we need just because you're on a retainer, like most retainers are hourly based, but they shouldn't be. They don't need to be hourly based, and we really should be thinking more creatively about how we structure them. So the alternative is the obvious alternative is the deliverables that you get for that retainer. Instead, so the outputs rather than the inputs of time and materials.
I love it. I love it. Can I devil's advocate on you?
Yeah,
because within the industry, we express very clearly outputs are not the result. Outcomes are. And yet I can't guarantee an outcome, nor would I necessarily want to bill on an outcome because I can't control it.
Well, I mean, you've articulated the three things that you can price. You can price the inputs of time and materials, the outputs of the deliverable, or the outcome or the value that you create.
Yeah.
And it's I think that's a common sentiment that we can't charge based on outcome or value creation. We can. If we choose to do so, we're taking risk when we do that. So there's all kinds of parameters around value-based pricing. And the highest expression of value-based pricing, which is performance pay. So instead of getting paid on the expectation of the value to be created, we're going to get paid on the actual value created. Sometimes that's hard to measure. There are all kinds of issues with that. I wrote a post on that recently. It's called When Your Pricing Creates Resentment. And it was specifically about performance pay models that don't properly align with the value being created temporally, so in time. It's a bit of a complex topic.
So there's the other piece, though. Sometimes the work that we do doesn't pay off even within the project time frame. It pays off 2, 3, 5 years later, and I can't necessarily directly connect it because people are people, and we take multiple paths to get to our choice of action.
Yeah, in those situations, it's hard to price outcomes. But let's look at a personal injury lawyer. They not only value price, it's not only performance pay, it's the highest expression of performance pay. It's contingency. I don't get paid unless you get paid, right? So you could, I'm not suggesting that you should, but if we're talking theoretically here, sometimes in crisis communications, an outcome is not going to jail or not getting sued. So it's easy to imagine how you could structure full contingency pay if you wanted to take the greatest amount of risk, or performance pay where you take a certain amount of risk. You get paid fees and then bonuses for incentives.
Blair, one last question. Timesheets, should we keep them close and hug them and use them, or should we burn them?
Thanks for the softball setup. The pitch right down the middle. I had a client. I was just trading email with them yesterday. I haven't heard from him in a while, but when I worked with them many years ago, the topic of timesheets came up, and he said, we don't do timesheets. I said, that's interesting. You're one of the few firms that don't. Why is that? He said, because one of my partners is adamant that timesheets are lies, and one of our core values is we never lie. And I thought, that is brilliant. And I immediately thought of all the lies I have recorded on my timesheets over time. It's such a calling out of timesheets are like the drunk looking for his lost car keys under the street lamp, not because he lost them there, but because the light is better there.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Well, that is one.
Burn them.
Love it. Love it. And
thank you.
Blair, ironically, we're out of time.
Well, I've enjoyed my time with both of you. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Farzana.
Thank you, Blair.